Thank you, Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to address the members opposite on this important matter. At a time when we face great disruption in the world, at a time when we face great insecurity amongst so many citizens at home and abroad, I think demonstrating confidence in our public institutions is the responsibility of legislators amid this pandemic. And I would hope that this exercise would not be politicized, but rather we would see a plan that Dr. Williams has helped inform this province. And when we evaluate the efficacy of a public servant, we measure the impact that their plan has had on the people of this province, on working people, on vulnerable people, and on those that matter most to us. And in this government, it is our students, it is our seniors, it is the most vulnerable. I reflect on the early days, Speaker, where in March, an extraordinary decision point made by Cabinet on the advice of Dr. Williams in a conversation we had on that memorable day ahead of the March break to close schools in this province, the first in the country, one of the first in the industrialized world to act decisively without hesitation. And that was based on the counsel and on the advice, based on emerging evidence that was still not known in March to civil societies, to governments, evidence that continues to emerge over time. But we acted to close schools. We did so decisively, and we did so in the public interest on the advice of Dr. Williams. Now, Dr. Williams has since been critical in the development and in the advice of how we build out a protocol that keeps students safe, and how we, I believe, measure the effectiveness of a public servant in this respect is to look at the results that underpin the plan that he has endorsed, a plan that he has helped guided every step of the way in this province. Speaker, let us reflect upon those data points that are available and accessible online, again made by the Ministry of Education in an effort to transparently advise all of us, legislators, parents, students and staff, of the risks that exist within schools and school boards right across Ontario. Mr. Speaker, the plan that Dr. Williams has helped inform includes all layers of prevention, using the best evidence and advice we have in this province. It includes actions and investments that make Ontario unique in the Federation when it comes to standing out as a province that wanted to act in each of the areas of priority, advanced by public health and advanced by the Chief Medical Officer of Health and the COVID command table. It's why, Speaker, we unveiled a protocol, the Outbreak Management Protocol, that aims to help schools identify and isolate COVID-19 cases, that aims to reduce the spread of COVID-19 within our schools, and to prevent and minimize transmission. The management plan for schools was developed by medical leaders with one aim, and that is to maximize safety and to minimize the risk to your children. We have the resources in place, as noted in the past in this House many times, Speaker, a priority on ensuring every layer of prevention is put in place. It is this government, Speaker, that I'm very proud to report, again with the support of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, where we have allocated $60 million to procure medical masks for all staff and cloth masks for all students who need it. That was based on a decision point. We are the first province, we are, as I understand, the only province to mandate masking for all students grade 4 and up, in classrooms, in hallways, and in other forms of socialization within schools. That again demonstrates leadership. We did not wait for other provinces to give us license to make this decision. We acted. We acted first, and we remain the only province to have that type of comprehensive masking protocol in place, fully supported by the Chief Medical Officer, fully guided by his expertise, and to be fair, the expertise of many other doctors, both at the command table and outside of the command table, including consulting sick kids throughout the process. $30 million to support hiring of staff. Recognizing the imperative of reducing classroom sizes, we put funding in place at the very beginning to enable school boards to hire. We put funding in place to ensure that more custodians, $75 million for context, colleagues, to ensure more custodians could be hired in this province. We put, and therefore, to clean our schools, deep clean our schools, to ensure they're constantly at a state of cleanliness that reduces potential transmission. We've put $40 million in addition to new monies thereafter to make sure our schools, bless you, our schools are rather our school buses remain safe and they remain cleaned on a constant basis, following the medical advice, following the emerging advice at the time, how important it was for contact and to minimize the risk of transmission by strengthening hand hygiene and cleaning of all high-touch surfaces. We have done that in stride, Speaker. We've also followed the medical advice, a perspective that has been shared and a concern, I think, shared with all of us, related to the mental health of children, recognizing that the isolation, the social isolation, the developmental challenge for so many young people to be home for the spring, then this summer, has really created some pressures on these kids. And we know that to be true. We see it every day. And that's why it remains so important that our schools remain open to the extent that it provides an incredible benefit to students and to their families as well. Speaker, the supports we put in place, I think, yield an important outcome. When we look at cleaning, when we look at staffing, when we look at additional PPE procurement, we've also announced improved cleaning of our school buses, as noted. But beyond that, we provided funding, $50 million, to improve air quality. And why? Why make that a priority with taxpayer dollars? Why dedicate funding specialized and enveloped specifically for the purpose of improving the environments around our children and the air quality within our schools? And it's because we recognize two fundamentals. The first is, quite frankly, that we inherited a very significant deferred maintenance backlog by the former Liberal government, and that is a fact, and we all have a role to play to remediate that challenge. We're putting money in place for HVAC to improve the effectiveness of these airflow systems and to make sure that parents know, the staff knows, and of course the kids, that we'll do whatever it takes in this respect. We've also put in place a protocol, Speaker, that ensures that when a child becomes ill at a school, that they are immediately isolated, that their parent is immediately contacted, that PPE is extended where it may not have existed before, including for a child, perhaps a young child, and to make sure that staff is with them, that public health is informed in the public health unit, that the school board is informed, and of course the parent. These protocols, now, 3 months, almost 3 months now concluded, almost at the halfway point, at least at the end of the first semester, we reflect on how this protocol has impacted our schools in the context of transmission. And I'm going to get there in a second, because my earlier thesis point, Speaker, was we have to look at the results, the impetus of my point, rather, is to look at the results and to judge Dr. Williams and those that advise the Cabinet by the outcome. And I think that's an important point to highlight, that there is great strength in the advice that's come to us from public health, given the incredible difficulty that our public health leaders, nurses, doctors, and frontline staff are demonstrating, are dealing with every single day. I also just want to note that throughout the course of this program, we've also consulted with public health and leading medical experts, including Dr. Williams, including Dr. Yaffe, and others at the command table. Where are those other areas that we can provide further supports to mitigate risk, to prevent the spread, in effect? And we have invested an additional $200 million in the summer, guided by the advice of medical leaders in the country, that more supports specifically dealing with hiring of custodians, of improved HVAC capacity, as well as PPE and staffing for distancing, is a strength. And so we allocated $200 million net new to achieve that. $70 million in additional funding on top of what I already enumerated in this House just some minutes ago for route protection and to support the cleaning of our buses. $12 million additional in addition to what we funded in June for mental health. And for so many members of the legislature, I mean, I look around and I've perhaps heard virtually every single member in this House of all parties speak about mental health as a priority. And if there's one thing perhaps we can unite around, it's the concept that this pandemic and the disruption that has been imposed by COVID-19 on all of us, on legislators, on parents, on young people, but most especially on kids. And the overwhelming advice from Dr. Williams is not to lose sight of the mental health impact of school closures and of the pandemic. And that is really important for myself as a decision maker in this context to be reminded of every step of the way. Obviously, something that I feel strongly about, having my own family experiences in both mental health and addiction. It has been a priority for me before the pandemic. It's why we doubled the funding in mental health well ahead of the pandemic. But it only underscores that there's more to do, and I think the funding that's been allocated systematically in June, in August, and thereafter has really helped us ensure that the kids and the staff get access to mental health supports, more psychologists and psychotherapists, access to therapists and social workers. I mean, it really is critical today, and I think it's critical every day, but perhaps today more than ever. And so we lead the nation in each of those investments. We have thoughtfully put in place a protocol guided by the medical advice, not because it was a good guessing exercise, Speaker. It wasn't because we hoped for the best. It's because we sought the advice of the medical leaders in this province, the foremost, senior-most expert that has been entrusted by successive governments of different political persuasion, of all parties and all members, giving him the endorsement to carry on the incredibly tough work to keep this province safe. That, I think, underscores why so many of us are concerned with the politicization of a process when people observing, for those dozens of souls watching now and perhaps fewer over the course of time this evening, honest to God, I'm not against, none of us in the abstract oppose scrutiny of public officials, accountability that is healthy in our parliamentary democracy. And by the way, Speaker, I am proud that our parliament, unlike many in this country, decided to make democracy a priority by keeping this House open through the pandemic. And I thank you and the staff and all members for ensuring that we deliver real accountability to the population, to people who are working harder, taking home less, and who are struggling. And they deserve to hold their government to account, likewise their officials to account. What they do not need, what they do not expect, and what they do not deserve, in the midst of a second wave, at a critical inflection point in our nation, where we have significant economic contraction, we have unemployment, we have people facing real difficulties on an economic side and, of course, on the human health side, on the mental health side, in so many realms. We face so many challenges. And I just wonder if infusing a political question mark is the way to instill confidence in our institutions. I remember when I worked in the federal government, often parties, Liberals or New Democrats, would often say we have a duty to instill confidence in our institutions. We should not be anti-science. We should not be anti-evidence. And I'm not suggesting anyone in this House is, to be quite fair. This is just my recollection of what was many moons ago. But I just think that, we need to err on the side of evidence and science. We need to instill confidence in people that the objective, independent expertise, a person who has practiced medicine more than I've been on earth, Speaker. Honestly, it is not the time to politicize a pandemic. It's not the time to introduce a sense of insecurity in the gentleman, in the leadership team, in the medical community who's giving guidance to keep us safe. And that is, I think, unwelcomed by so many observing. It raises a question mark when we want more people to have certainty of the facts, because as the members remind us every single day, there's information overload. They would assert or contend that information is changing. Of course, the risk of COVID is changing, and therefore there's a causal change in the direction and the restrictions. It's regional, it's provincial. I get it. I have family who are consumers of news, and they ask me all the time, what is happening? What's the deal with today's announcement? But I do believe, going back to my earlier point, I really do believe the best practice, if we're going to use a finite amount of legislators' time, let us explore what else we can do to keep the province safe, opposed to potentially undermining the confidence of people in the person who's been entrusted by all of us to give the best advice according to the emerging evidence that exists within this province and within the country. And therefore, it is with regret that I think many of us realize that this is not an exercise in substantive debate on the merits of this person, this leader, this medical practitioner. It's increasingly a discussion that goes well beyond the CV, well beyond the judgment, well beyond the selflessness demonstrated by him, and to be fair, every public officer across the country who every single day without exception since March have been working in the public interest. And I think we owe them gratitude, Speaker. We owe them gratitude for doing whatever they can to keep kids safe, to keep seniors safe, and to ensure our province recovers from this challenge. Now, Speaker, earlier I spoke a bit about data points, and I know that there's a refrain at times, and I get it. You know, statistics, they're almost dehumanizing at points, right? We talk about 99%, 100%. What does that mean to a parent sitting at home? And I get it. I understand the numbers are numbers. There's a cold sort of effect of some of these data points that they don't, maybe they don't emotively connect to the hearts or pull on the hearts and string of a person observing. But we can't permit a debate on the health and safety of children to be decoupled from the rational data that factually is before our eyes, and let other arguments, emotional arguments, or often arguments that are predicated on ideology, not necessarily on fact, to triumph. And I will have none of that. And I don't think any one of us should be peddling in that type of campaign to, for some, perhaps not in this House, Speaker, to misinform, those not in this House, Speaker, that may attempt to dissuade the confidence of those giving the best advice they have. And so let's look at those data points. Let's try to humanize what the statistics mean to people in this province, to a parent watching right now thinking, is it safe to go to the local store? Is it safe to send my child to school? Is it safe for me to return to the workforce or to stay in the workforce for so many people? Let's compare this province to the next largest province, not because it's convenient, because I choose to compare us to the worst. I choose to compare us to the next largest jurisdiction in this country. They have 1 million fewer students, notwithstanding we have 2, they have 1. Let's look at the data. When you compare the rates of 130 cases per 100,000 in Quebec, when you compare that, in British Columbia, they have 158 cases per 100,000. In Saskatchewan, 244 cases per 100,000. In Alberta, 301 cases per 100,000. In Manitoba, 621 cases per 100,000. Ontario continues to have the lowest rate of active COVID-19 cases among all the provinces, when you exclude Atlantic Canada, at 89 cases per 100,000. 85.75% of schools. We're talking about more than 4 out of 5 schools have no reported active case of COVID at all. 99.94% of students do not have an active case of COVID. Wow. 99.8% of students never had a case of COVID. Unbelievable. 99.9% of staff currently do not have an active case. 99.71% of staff have never had a case. I mean, colleagues, I appreciate everyone in my own riding, in my own family, having to see a case within a school, in fact, a school closure in that case. I understand it's unsettling, and for those of you who are parents, I understand how, or I seek to understand just how awful that call or email is. But this data, this result, is something we need to rally behind, not the government, not a politician, but the people advising the cabinet and the government, and most importantly, the frontline practitioners, the teachers and the nurses and the administrators and principals working their back off to ensure, yes, that 99.94% of students remain COVID-free in this province. And for that, I say thank you to everyone playing a role, stepping up, punching above their weight, and that includes most certainly the man, the gentleman, the practitioner that has advised us from the very beginning, and that is Dr. Williams, for whom I'm grateful.